If you've noticed, there's a whole slew of sub 1 million peso EVs out in the market today. There's the Dongfeng Nano Box, the recently launched VinFast VF3, and mini EVs such as the Jetour ice cream and its sort of derivatives. Well, throwing its hat into the ring is BYD with this model, the Seagull. And we're here to find out if it has the potential to be, well, let's go straight to the point, the best sub 1 million peso EV in the market today. Now, of course, to attract customers to this tiny little EV, you have to make it look attractive. And, well, BYD resisted the temptation of simply taking the Dolphin and shrinking it. No, this one actually has distinction over its bigger brother. And here's a little fun fact about BYD's design. Well, it's headed by a man named Wolfgang Egger. Now, Egger was actually a long-time Volkswagen Group guy. He did Audis and Lamborghinis mainly, and a couple of Volkswagen models along the way. And he's now designing BYDs. He's now the chief designer of the brand. And you could probably see a bit of that influence here, particularly around the headlights and the corners. And you could probably see a sort of familiar design when you look at the wheels. Now, moving to its side, it has a very distinct profile. Now, it curves downwards, but you also see the window line sort of meeting towards the back, and it gives it a very funky and very, very different looking design indeed. And if you see one on the road, well, it definitely does grab attention. And it's also helped by the fact that it's this color. Now, over the back, it has this sort of chunky profile that starts off kind of thin at the front, then wider over at the back. And of course, you have BYD's signature full-width taillights to go along with it. So, all in all, props to BYD. I mean, they didn't go for the usual, let's make a small hatchback and let's make it look like everything else. Now, the design might come off as a little love-hate for some people, but the chief designer said that ever since he joined BYD, he has more creative liberty when it comes to design, and he's influenced his team to do so. And the main objective really is to maximize interior space, and because there's no need for an engine here, they can move the whole front end as far as they can or move it as back as far as they can. Basically, the possibilities are endless with EV designs. Now, inside the Seagull, you get an interior design that complements the exterior quite well. It's very funky, it's very vibrant, and, well, you won't mistake it for an older looking model at all. Now, what surprised me the most actually is the interior materials, because, touching the steering wheel and this panel right here, you'd think you'd be in a much more expensive vehicle. I mean, yes, you do get hard plastics on the dash top and the door cards, but they're textured in a way that it doesn't feel cheap. So it's a very interesting point here in the Seagull. Now, here you have a rather small instrument cluster, if you can still call this a cluster. It's actually the size of a pretty hefty mobile phone, and it does display enough information, but yeah, some people might find that too small, but that is then complemented by a 10.1-inch screen. Now, this screen houses not just the infotainment system, not just your entertainment options, but also the vehicle settings. So you can turn on some systems on and off in here. You can also change the way the car drives and whatnot. I mean, yes, it's commonplace in premium vehicles, but you have to remember that this thing is less than 1 million pesos. Now, thankfully, they kept the physical buttons here, and BYD resisted the urge to just shove all functions into the screen. I like the fact that it still has physical buttons. Now, this little toggle here is actually your gear selector. You press on the side to put it in park, push up to reverse, push down into drive. Now, this little dial here, on the other hand, is your volume knob. You also have a various array of controls here in the center. Now, if you're going to notice, you don't get a storage box here or for your center console. Instead, BYD moved it down here. So this is basically where you put all your stuff, your wallet, your cell phone, your keys, and etc. And this little pad right here is your wireless charger. where they usually have two cup holders to go along here, one larger, one smaller. And what's interesting about this whole center console here is there's space at the front and it's shaped in a Z, and the back end of that Z is storage space for those at the back. Oh, and just like every other BYD out there, that screen can turn portrait mode. Right, so behind the wheel of the BYD Seagull. Now the Seagull positions itself again, like just below the Dolphin. It is part of the Ocean series, which we mentioned about earlier. Now when it comes to driving impressions, I have to say that it's not bad at all. And I'm not saying it's not bad for the price, which is under ₱1,000,000, but it genuinely feels like a more expensive vehicle. Now take example for the ride. There is a certain compliance in the ride that you'd sort of expect from a bigger car. But this is tiny. This is way less than 4 meters long. And yet, the ride comfort is that from a segment or two even above it. There's good suspension compliance. It doesn't hit the bump stops. It doesn't feel too firm. It's not too soft either. So that's an interesting thing about it. I mean, it helps that the batteries are down low here in the chassis, and that keeps the center of gravity low. And in a way, it does help the ride comfort. So in terms of comfort, it is surprisingly good. Because, a subcompact vehicle, it's normally a bit of a choppy riding experience because, they're small and their wheelbases aren't that long. I mean, yes, the Seagull does have a long wheelbase for its segment or for its size class, but it's still relatively short when you compare it to other vehicles. So good job BYD there when it comes to the suspension tuning. But what about handling? So normally there's going to be a compromise there, and there is a small trade-off nonetheless. Now obviously this wasn't designed to be a hot hatchback or a sports car or anything of the sort, or it doesn't have any performance inclinations. However, you take it around a bend, at speed, which we kind of did earlier. Hi BYD. And yes, there is body roll given. But going back to the handling, it is, it's decent for what it is. It's decent for a subcompact hatchback, surprisingly grippy. And it's even on tires that, they're eco-oriented tires. So, the fact that it's got good road holding to begin with is, it says something about the suspension tuning of this car. Another thing I did like about the Seagull were the brakes. Normally an EV would have extremely grabby brakes because of the regenerative braking, but it's totally not the case here in the Seagull. It feels like a normal gas-powered car's brake. And if anything, the brake modulation in this is probably even better than some of them. And most first-time car buyers, well, they probably do have experience from gas-powered vehicles or diesel-powered vehicles, and they didn't want to alienate them by giving them like a totally different driving experience. And I get that. Again, it feels like a normal car to drive. You don't have to do much adjustments. Of course, the ergonomics, which I will mention in a bit, they're similar to your conventional car. So of course, this being a city car, maneuverability is of importance. So, you could basically do one-lane U-turns here with absolutely no issue at all. I mean, what do you expect? It's a sub 4-meter car. But at the same time, you could easily do these maneuvers because the steering is so light. Now, right now, I'm actually in normal mode with standard steering feedback. Now, personally, I prefer more weight in the steering, more feel and feedback in the steering, because I would like a general idea where the front wheels are pointed. You do have the option of making the steering even lighter. So let's say you're in a tight esquinita or you have a tricky parking maneuver you have to deal with, that's going to be of great help. Now in sport mode, and yes, this car does come with sport mode, it does change the character of the vehicle. It won't change the handling dynamics and it won't exactly make it go faster, but it does feel snappier and more responsive, and at the same time, the steering, again, weighs up a little bit more and offers even more feel and feedback. Now, it doesn't turn it into a hot hatchback. I mean, it's on passive suspension. I mean, come on guys, it's less than ₱1,000,000. there is a good compromise in suspension tuning here. Because, you know, this is going to be a daily driver after all. So you're not going to complain much about performance or any of that. I mean, obviously it's not going to be the fastest EV in the world. It's no Tesla, it's no Porsche Taycan or any of that. But for what it is, it does offer good performance. Now you're probably asking about range, because that's always going to be the question when it comes to EVs. Now, BYD claims you can do over 300 kilometers on a single charge, on a single full charge. And I know what you're thinking, okay, what about a similarly sized hatchback? Well, in our testing at least, they do about the same. So this is about the size of, say, a Toyota Wigo or a Honda Brio or a Suzuki Celerio. And those also do about 300 kilometers more or less on a single tank of fuel in city driving conditions. Now, is that going to quell any range anxiety issues? Well, okay, if you're considering buying an EV, you have to be open-minded about it. That yes, the charging infrastructure in this country isn't as, say, you know, similar to other countries or other, let's be honest, more developed countries. But every purchase of one of these does include a free charger. Yes, so the chargers are at home, you can install them, it's a wall box. And, you know, think of it this way, you treat this as a daily driver. Every time you come home from the office, you just plug it in, and if you're worried about overcharging, you know, the charging system does include, you know, a cutoff. So when you reach a certain charge, you know, there you go, you don't have to worry about it. It shuts it off automatically. All in all, behind the wheel, the BYD Seagull is giving a very good first impression. But of course, it's going to be different if you're going to live with it day to day. So watch the space, fellas, and let's wait for the full review, how it fares in the real world. Now, first impressions, as we mentioned earlier, are very promising. And as you know, first impressions do last. Now, the BYD Seagull is a very good indicator of just how serious the brand is in expanding in the Philippine market. Now, not only do they want to punch up with models such as the Han, but they also want to sort of dominate the low-end EV market. But when I say low-end, it doesn't feel low-end. And especially for the price, right down here, that it's being sold for, it doesn't feel like a cheap product at all. You mean when you touch the interior and whatnot. So the Seagull does a very good impression of making you feel that you got more from what you paid for. But the real world test is going to be once we try and living with one, once we have one available for review. But until next time, we'll see how this performs in the Philippine market, and we'll see you in the next video.